The silence in the pediatric wing of St. Catherine's Hospital was deafening as Eleanor Harris, CEO of the nation's largest pharmaceutical empire, watched her 7-year-old daughter, Emma, stare blankly at the ceiling. 3 months after the diving accident that shattered her spine, the vibrant little girl who once danced through corporate boardrooms had become a prisoner in her own body. "I'm sorry, but the damage is permanent," Dr. Richardson had whispered. That morning, his words echoing the verdict of every specialist Eleanor had flown in from around the world. Just as Eleanor felt her last thread of hope snap, a gentle voice broke through her despair. She turned to see a man in worn jeans and a faded t-shirt, his calloused hands tenderly holding those of a young boy. "Excuse me," said Owen Brooks, his eyes filled with quiet determination. "I think I can help your daughter walk again. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." The antiseptic smell of St. Catherine's Hospital had become as familiar to Eleanor Harris as the boardroom of Harris Pharmaceutical Industries. For 3 months, she had traded her corner office overlooking downtown Phoenix for this sterile room on the 7th floor, where her 7-year-old daughter, Emma, lay motionless beneath crisp white sheets. Emma's hazel eyes, once sparkling with the same determination that had built Eleanor's billion-dollar empire, now stared vacantly at the acoustic ceiling tiles. The diving accident at their Scottsdale Country Club had happened in an instant of faith, miscalculated leap from the high board that compressed her small spine with devastating precision. What should have been a perfect summer day of mother-daughter bonding had become the moment that divided Eleanor's life into before and after. The T12 vertebra was completely crushed. Dr. Richardson explained for what felt like the 100th time, his voice carrying the practiced sympathy of someone who delivered impossible news regularly. "The spinal cord injury is complete. There's no sensation or movement below the point of trauma." He paused, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "Mrs. Harris, I know this is difficult to accept, but Emma will never walk again." Eleanor's manicured fingers gripped the arms of the visitor's chair until her knuckles turned white. She had built her pharmaceutical empire by refusing to accept the word impossible, by funding research that others deemed too risky, by believing that every medical problem had a solution waiting to be discovered. Yet here she sat, surrounded by the most advanced medical technology money could buy, and none of it could help her own daughter. The irony wasn't lost on her. Harris Pharmaceutical Industries had pioneered breakthrough treatments for dozens of conditions, had brought hope to millions of patients worldwide. Their neural regeneration research division was considered cutting edge. Their spinal injury medications were prescribed in hospitals across 5 continents. But when it came to Emma, all of Eleanor's resources and connections had led to the same devastating conclusion: permanent paralysis. She had exhausted every option. The Johns Hopkins specialists had been flown in within 48 hours of the accident. The renowned neurosurgeon from Mayo Clinic had spent 3 days reviewing Emma's case. She had even contacted Dr. Yamamoto in Tokyo, whose experimental stem cell treatments had shown promise in early trials. Each consultation had ended the same way, with gentle but firm assertions that Emma's injury was too severe, too complete, too final. Emma had stopped asking when she could go home, stopped asking when she could dance again, stopped asking the questions that once tumbled from her lips like water from a fountain. The vibrant little girl who used to interrupt board meetings with impromptu ballet performances, who would spin through the executive suite in her tutu while Eleanor worked late, had retreated into a silence that broke Eleanor's heart more than any medical diagnosis ever could. The rehabilitation team had introduced words that felt foreign and terrible: wheelchair accessibility, adaptive equipment, modified expectations. They spoke of Emma's new normal with the kind of optimistic determination that Eleanor recognized from her own business presentations, the careful reframing of devastating setbacks as opportunities for growth. But Eleanor wasn't ready to accept a new normal. Not for Emma. Not when her daughter had barely begun to live. The financial cost meant nothing. Eleanor could afford the best care money could buy. The emotional cost, however, was bankrupting her. She had taken indefinite leave from Harris Pharmaceutical, leaving the company she had built from nothing in the hands of her executive team. For the first time in her adult life, business seemed insignificant compared to the small, still figure in the hospital bed. Emma's physical therapy sessions were heartbreaking exercises in futility. The therapists would move her legs through range of motion exercises while Emma stared at the ceiling, her face blank with resignation that no 7-year-old should ever have to wear. Eleanor would watch from the corner, fighting back tears as professional strangers manipulated her daughter's lifeless limbs. The worst moments came in the evening, when the medical staff would retreat and leave them alone with the oppressive quiet of the hospital room. Emma would sometimes cry, not from physical pain, but from the deeper ache of a future that had been stolen in an instant. Eleanor had no words for these moments, no CEO-level solutions to offer. She could only hold her daughter's hand and feel utterly powerless. Sleep had become elusive for Eleanor. She would doze fitfully in the reclining chair beside Emma's bed, waking at every sound, every shift in her daughter's breathing. The nights stretched endlessly, filled with what-if thoughts that served no purpose except to torture her with alternate realities where she had been more careful, more protective, more present. Dr. Richardson had begun suggesting that it was time to start planning for Emma's discharge to a rehabilitation facility, time to begin the long process of learning to live with permanent disability. The phrase made Eleanor feel physically ill. Emma was 7 years old. She shouldn't be learning to live with anything except joy and possibility and the endless potential that youth was supposed to represent. As morning light filtered through the hospital room window, Eleanor made a silent promise to her sleeping daughter. She would not give up. Somewhere in the world, there had to be someone with answers, someone with hope, someone with the ability to see possibilities where others saw only medical facts. She had built an empire by refusing to accept limitations. She would apply that same relentless determination to fighting for Emma's future. What Eleanor didn't know was that the answer to her prayers was about to walk through the door in the most unexpected form imaginable. The pediatric wing of St. Catherine's Hospital rarely saw visitors who looked like Owen Brooks. His worn Levi's bore honest stains from actual work, not the artificially distressed denim that cost more than most people's weekly salary. His flannel shirt had been washed so many times that the red and black checks had faded to gentle suggestion, and his work boots showed the kind of scuffs that came from years of construction, sites and manual labor. More striking than his appearance was the small boy beside him, maybe 9 years old, with sandy hair that refused to stay combed and intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything. The boy's hand was clasped firmly in Owen's calloused palm, and there was something in the way they moved together that spoke of a partnership forged by shared struggle. Eleanor noticed them first as they paused at the nurse's station, Owen speaking in low, respectful tones to the charge nurse while the boy waited patiently beside him. There was something about Owen's bearing, a quiet confidence that seemed at odds with his working-class appearance, that caught her attention. He carried himself like someone accustomed to being taken seriously, despite looking like he'd be more at home on a construction site than in a hospital. The charge nurse was pointing down the hall toward Emma's room, and Eleanor felt a flutter of confusion. They weren't expecting any visitors, and the hospital had strict protocols about who could access the pediatric wing. As Owen and the boy approached Emma's door, Eleanor's protective instincts sharpened. "Excuse me," Eleanor said, stepping into the hallway with the authority that had silenced countless boardrooms. "I think you may be lost. This is a private room." Owen stopped, his gray eyes meeting hers with a directness that was somehow both respectful and unflinching. Up close, she noticed details that the distance had obscured, the silver threading. Through his dark hair, the lines around his eyes that spoke of both laughter and sorrow. The way his hands, though clearly those of a manual laborer, were meticulously clean. "Mrs. Harris," he said, and his voice carried an unexpected warmth. "My name is Owen Brooks, and this is my son Leo." The boy stepped forward slightly, offering a small wave that was somehow both shy and confident. "I heard about Emma's accident, and I think I might be able to help her." Eleanor's first instinct was to call security. In the 3 months since the accident, she had dealt with countless well-meaning strangers offering everything from miracle cures to prayer circles. Desperation of a mother with an injured daughter seemed to attract every charlatan and false prophet within a 100-mile radius. "I appreciate your concern," Eleanor said, her voice taking on the polite but dismissive tone she used with persistent salespeople. "But Emma is receiving the best possible care from qualified medical professionals. I'm sure you mean well, but I know what the doctors have told you," Owen interrupted gently. "That the damage is permanent, that she'll never walk again, that you need to accept her new reality and start planning accordingly." His words were delivered without judgment, but with an understanding that made Eleanor pause. 3 months ago, they told me the same thing about Leo." Eleanor's eyes shifted to the boy, who was now looking up at his father with an expression of proud affection. Leo appeared perfectly normal, healthy, unremarkable in the way that healthy people always seemed unremarkable, until you had lived in the world of medical impossibilities. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Leo had a diving accident too," Owen continued, his voice dropping to a more intimate tone. "Pool at a friend's house. Compressed fracture of his L1 vertebra. Complete paralysis from the waist down. The specialists at Phoenix General gave us the same prognosis your doctors are giving you." Eleanor felt something shift in her chest, a dangerous flutter of hope that she had been desperately trying to suppress. "That's impossible," she said, but even as the words left her mouth, she was studying Leo more carefully. The boy stood normally, shifted his weight naturally, showed no signs of any mobility issues. "I thought so too," Owen said with a slight smile. "But impossible and unlikely aren't the same thing. Sometimes the medical establishment gets so focused on statistics and precedent that they forget to look for alternatives." Leo stepped forward, his young voice clear and confident. "My dad didn't give up on me," he said simply. "Even when all the doctors said he should, he found a different way." Eleanor felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. For 3 months, she had been surrounded by medical professionals who spoke in terms of limitations and adaptations. Here was a man in worn work clothes claiming that those limitations might not be absolute. What kind of different way? She asked, hating herself for the hope creeping into her voice. Owen glanced toward Emma's room. "Would it be all right if I met her? I'd like to see what we're working with before I explain my approach." Sometimes the individual situation matters more than the general diagnosis. Every rational part of Eleanor's mind screamed warnings. This man had no credentials, no medical training that she could see, no reason to be trusted with her daughter's fragile condition. He was exactly the kind of false hope that the grief counselor had warned her about, the desperate parent's vulnerability being exploited by someone offering miracle cures. But looking at Leo, standing healthy and whole beside his father, Eleanor found her rational mind overruled by something deeper. What if Owen Brooks was exactly what he appeared to be, not a charlatan or a fraud, but simply a father who had refused to accept the impossible? "One meeting," Eleanor said finally, her voice carrying the same cautious authority she used in high-stakes negotiations. "You can meet Emma, but I'll be present the entire time. And at the first sign that this is some kind of scam or exploitation, you'll leave immediately." Owen nodded solemnly. "That's fair." All I'm asking for is a chance to show you that sometimes there are possibilities hiding just outside the boundaries of conventional wisdom." As Eleanor led them toward Emma's room, she caught Leo looking up at his father with an expression of absolute trust. It was the kind of faith that could only be earned through proven miracles. And for the first time in 3 months, Eleanor allowed herself to wonder if miracles might still be possible. Eleanor Harris had never imagined that her greatest business triumph would become the source of her deepest personal torment. At 42, she stood at the helm of Harris Pharmaceutical Industries, a company she had built from a small research laboratory into a global empire worth $12 billion. Forbes had featured her on 3 covers, Harvard Business School taught case studies about her innovative market strategies, and she had been invited to speak at the World Economic Forum for 5 consecutive years. None of that success had prepared her for the helplessness she felt watching her daughter lie motionless in a hospital bed. Eleanor's rise to prominence had been fueled by a very specific kind of determination, the relentless drive of someone who refused to accept that barriers were permanent. She had started Harris Pharmaceutical 20 years earlier with a simple premise: that the most significant medical breakthroughs came from researchers who were willing to challenge conventional wisdom, who were bold enough to explore the spaces between established knowledge. Her father, Dr. James Harris, had been a small-town general practitioner who treated everything from broken bones to broken hearts with equal compassion. He had died when Eleanor was 25, leaving behind a modest practice and a daughter who carried his belief that medicine should be about healing, not just managing symptoms. Eleanor had used his life insurance money to purchase a failing pharmaceutical research facility in Phoenix, determined to create treatments that would have made her father proud. The early years had been an exercise in controlled desperation. Eleanor had thrown herself into learning every aspect of pharmaceutical development, from molecular biology to FDA regulations to international patent law. She had worked 18-hour days, slept on a cot in her office, and lived on coffee and determination while her small team of researchers pursued treatments that larger companies considered too risky or unprofitable. Her first breakthrough had come with a revolutionary treatment for pediatric epilepsy, a condition that struck close to home because her young cousin had suffered from seizures that no existing medication could control. The treatment had not only succeeded beyond her wildest projections, but had also established Harris Pharmaceuticals' reputation for tackling the medical challenges that others avoided. Success had followed success. Her company had developed groundbreaking treatments for rare genetic disorders, had pioneered new approaches to cancer therapy, had created medications that restored hope to families who had been told to prepare for the worst. Eleanor had built her empire by refusing to accept medical impossibilities, by funding research that traditional pharmaceutical companies deemed too experimental or too expensive. The irony was devastating. Eleanor had spent 20 years proving that medical limitations were often temporary obstacles rather than permanent walls. Her company's neural regeneration research division was considered among the most advanced in the world. Harris Pharmaceutical held patents on 17 different treatments related to spinal cord injuries and nervous system repair. She had literally built her fortune on the premise that paralysis could be overcome. Yet when it came to Emma, all of that expertise felt useless. Eleanor had consulted with every specialist her company had relationships with, had reviewed every experimental treatment in their research pipeline, had called in favors from colleagues around the world. The answer was always the same: Emma's injury was too severe, too complete, too devastating for current medical science to address. The personal cost of Emma's accident had been immeasurable. Eleanor had taken her first extended leave from Harris Pharmaceutical since the company's founding, leaving the day-to-day operations in the hands of her executive team while she maintained a vigil at Emma's bedside. The board of directors had been understanding but concerned. The company's stock price had dipped slightly as investors worried about leadership stability. Eleanor found herself caught between two worlds. In one world, she was a pharmaceutical industry titan who had built an empire by refusing to accept medical limitations. In the other world, she was simply a mother watching her daughter slip away from her, emotionally if not physically. Emma had been Eleanor's miracle in more ways than one. Eleanor had focused so intensely on building her company that she had convinced herself she didn't need or want a family. Then, at 35, an unexpected pregnancy had forced her to reconsider her priorities. She had approached motherhood the same way she approached business challenges, with meticulous planning, extensive research, and absolute determination to succeed. Emma had exceeded every expectation. She was brilliant like her mother, but also possessed a joy and spontaneity that Eleanor had somehow never learned. Emma could spend hours in Eleanor's laboratory, asking endless questions about how medicines worked and why some people got sick while others stayed healthy. She had inherited Eleanor's curiosity, but combined it with a warmth and empathy that drew people to her like a magnet. The diving accident had happened during one of Eleanor's rare attempts at work-life balance. She had blocked out an entire Saturday for mother-daughter time at their country club, planning to teach Emma some of the swimming techniques she had learned in her own youth. Emma had been so excited, chattering nonstop about wanting to try the high dive like the big kids. Eleanor had been distracted checking emails on her phone while Emma climbed the ladder to the 10-foot platform. She had looked up just in time to see Emma's small body knife through the water at the wrong angle, too vertical, too fast. The sound of the impact would haunt Eleanor for the rest of her life. In the weeks following the accident, Eleanor had thrown herself into research with the same intensity she had once applied to building her company. She had read thousands of medical papers, consulted with experts in 12 countries, explored experimental treatments that existed only in theoretical form. She had offered to fund research studies, to purchase experimental equipment, to underwrite clinical trials, anything that might offer hope for Emma's recovery. But for the first time in her adult life, Eleanor's money and influence felt powerless. The human nervous system, it seemed, operated according to rules that couldn't be negotiated or purchased or overcome through sheer determination. The nights were the worst. After the medical staff had completed their evening rounds and the hospital had settled into its quiet rhythm, Eleanor would sit beside Emma's bed and confront the possibility that her daughter might never dance again, never run through the halls of Harris Pharmaceutical, never grow up to inherit the empire that Eleanor had built with her in mind. Eleanor had always been a problem solver, a woman who approached every challenge with the confidence that solutions existed for those bold enough to find them. Emma's paralysis represented the first problem in her adult life that seemed genuinely unsolvable, and the helplessness was slowly destroying her. She had considered bringing Emma home, converting their Scottsdale estate into a private medical facility where Emma could receive round-the-clock care in familiar surroundings. But the doctors had convinced her that Emma needed the resources and expertise available only in a hospital setting. At least for now. The guilt was almost unbearable. Eleanor had spent Emma's entire life building a pharmaceutical empire, telling herself that her work was ultimately about helping young people like Emma. Now, when her own daughter needed help, all of Eleanor's professional success felt hollow and meaningless. When Owen Brooks appeared in the hallway outside Emma's room, claiming that he might be able to help, Eleanor's first instinct was skepticism. She had dealt with dozens of well-meaning strangers offering miracle cures, prayer healing, experimental treatments that existed only in their imagination. Her wealth and Emma's condition had attracted every kind of charlatan and false prophet, but something about Owen was different. He didn't carry himself like someone trying to exploit desperate parents. He spoke with the quiet confidence of someone who had solved an impossible problem before, and his son Leo stood beside him like living proof that miracles might still be possible. For the first time in 3 months, Eleanor found herself wondering if her greatest challenge might also become her Greatest victory. Owen Brooks had once been the kind of man that Fortune 500 companies fought to recruit. His doctoral dissertation on biomedical engineering from Stanford had been groundbreaking enough to attract attention from medical device manufacturers around the world. At 32, he had been the youngest research director in the history of advanced medical systems, leading a team of engineers and physicians in developing revolutionary treatments for spinal cord injuries. His laboratory had been a temple of cutting-edge technology, where theoretical possibilities became practical solutions. Owen had held 19 patents on medical devices, had published papers in the most prestigious biomedical journals, and had been invited to present his research at conferences from Geneva to Tokyo. His work on neural stimulation devices had been hailed as the future of paralysis treatment, that life felt like it belonged to someone else now. These days, Owen Brooks was known primarily as the quiet contractor who could fix anything, the single father who showed up to every school event, the man who had somehow learned to find contentment in simplicity after losing everything that had once defined him. The transformation had begun 6 years earlier, on a Tuesday afternoon that had started like any other. Owen had been in his laboratory, fine-tuning the latest prototype of a neural interface device, when his phone rang with news that shattered his carefully constructed world. Sarah Brooks, his wife of 8 years and the most brilliant physician he had ever known, had been killed in a car accident while rushing to the hospital to treat an emergency patient. The collision had been instant and unsurvivable, a drunk driver running a red light, destroying in seconds a woman who had dedicated her life to preserving life in others. Sarah had been more than Owen's wife. She had been his intellectual equal, his closest collaborator, his inspiration for choosing medicine over the more lucrative field of general engineering. They had met during his graduate studies, when she was completing her residency in neurology, and their shared passion for solving impossible medical problems had formed the foundation of both their marriage and their careers. In the weeks following Sarah's death, Owen had attempted to lose himself in work. He had pushed his research team harder, stayed later in the laboratory, pursued more ambitious projects with desperate intensity. But grief had a way of making even the most meaningful work feel hollow. The neural devices he was developing were designed to help paralyzed patients walk again, but they couldn't bring back the woman who had made his life complete. The breaking point had come 8 months after Sarah's death, when 3-year-old Leo had been diagnosed with a rare neurological condition that was slowly robbing him of his ability to walk. The irony was devastating. Owen spent his days developing treatments for paralysis, yet he was powerless to help his own son. The medical establishment had offered Leo the same prognosis they would later give Emma: progressive deterioration, eventual complete paralysis, adaptive equipment, and modified expectations. Owen had consulted with every specialist he knew, had explored every experimental treatment and development, had used his considerable influence in the medical device industry to seek alternative solutions. When conventional medicine failed Leo, Owen had made a decision that horrified his colleagues and ended his prestigious career. He had resigned from Advanced Medical Systems, sold their Phoenix home, and dedicated himself full-time to developing an unconventional treatment approach that combined his engineering expertise with techniques that existed outside the boundaries of approved medical practice. Working from a converted garage in Flagstaff, Owen had spent 2 years developing a treatment protocol that integrated neural stimulation with intensive physical therapy, nutritional support, and what he privately called faith-based healing, the belief that the human body's capacity for recovery exceeded what medical textbooks described as possible. The approach had been dismissed by his former colleagues as pseudoscience, as desperate parental delusion, as dangerous experimentation on a vulnerable young person. Owen had been quietly blacklisted from the medical device industry, his research papers rejected by journals that had once eagerly published his work. But Leo had begun to improve. Slowly at first, Then more dramatically, the young boy had regained sensation and movement that his doctors had declared permanently lost. Within 18 months, Leo was walking normally, running, playing like any healthy young person. The medical establishment had no explanation for his recovery and seemed more interested in discrediting Owen's methods than in understanding how they might help other patients. Owen had attempted to publish his results, to share his breakthrough with the medical community, but his fall from grace had made him untouchable. Research institutions wouldn't fund his studies, medical journals wouldn't review his papers, and former colleagues treated him like a charlatan who had somehow gotten lucky with his own son. The isolation had been painful, but not unexpected. Owen had spent enough years in academic medicine to understand how the system worked, how innovation was often resisted when it challenged established paradigms. He had chosen to help Leo over protecting his career, and he had never regretted that decision. The transition to construction work had been surprisingly satisfying. Owen had always been skilled with his hands, and there was something deeply appealing about creating solutions to immediate, tangible problems. His engineering background made him exceptionally good at troubleshooting complex renovation projects, and his reputation for reliability and craftsmanship had quickly spread throughout Flagstaff's construction community. More importantly, the work allowed him to be present for Leo in a way that his previous career never had. Owen attended every school event, coached Leo's little league team, helped with homework every evening. He had discovered that being a present father was more fulfilling than being a prestigious researcher, but Owen had never stopped believing that his treatment approach could help other paralyzed patients. He had quietly continued his research, maintaining his converted garage laboratory and staying current with developments in biomedical engineering. When he read about Emma Harris's diving accident in the local newspaper, something had stirred in him, a recognition that here was another young person who might benefit from the methods that had saved Leo. The decision to approach Eleanor Harris had not been made lightly. Owen understood that his appearance and background would make him seem like an unlikely medical expert. He knew that Eleanor would be skeptical, that she would have dealt with countless people offering false hope, but Leo was living proof that miracles were possible, and Owen believed that Emma deserved the same chance at recovery that his son had received. Sometimes the most important breakthroughs came from people working outside the established system, from parents who refused to accept limitations that others considered absolute. As Owen stood in the hallway of St. Catherine's Hospital, watching Eleanor Harris struggle with the decision to trust him, he felt the weight of everything he had learned about healing, about hope, about the space between medical impossibility and miraculous recovery. He wasn't asking Eleanor to believe in him. He was asking her to believe in Emma's potential for healing, even when that potential existed beyond the boundaries of conventional medical wisdom. Eleanor Harris had built her pharmaceutical empire by making calculated risks, but allowing Owen Brooks into Emma's hospital room felt like the most dangerous gamble of her life. As she led Owen and Leo down the sterile hallway, her mind raced through all the ways this encounter could go wrong. Emma was fragile physically and emotionally, and Eleanor's protective instincts screamed warnings about trusting a stranger, whose only credentials were a recovered son and worn work clothes. "Before we go in," Eleanor said, stopping outside Emma's door, "I need you to understand something. Emma has been through more than any 7-year-old should have to endure. She's barely speaking to the psychiatrist. She won't engage with the physical therapists. And she's completely withdrawn from everyone except me. If your presence causes her any distress—" "I understand," Owen interrupted gently. "And if at any point you feel uncomfortable, we'll leave immediately. I'm not here to upset Emma or give you false hope. I'm here because I believe there might be possibilities that haven't been fully explored." Leo stepped closer to his father, his young voice clear and confident. "Emma's going to like me," he said with the matter-of-fact certainty that only young people could possess. I know what it's like to be told you can't walk. I can tell her about how it feels to prove the doctors wrong. Eleanor felt something twist in her chest, a dangerous flutter of hope mixed with terror. She pushed open the door to Emma's room. Steeling herself for whatever was about to unfold, Emma lay propped against pillows, her dark hair spread across the white hospital bedding, her hazel eyes focused on the television mounted on the wall. She looked impossibly small in the adult-sized hospital bed, dwarfed by the medical equipment that monitored her vital signs and delivered medications through a complex network of tubes and wires. "Emma, sweetheart," Eleanor said softly, "we have some visitors. This is Mr. Brooks and his son Leo." Emma's eyes shifted toward the door, taking in Owen and Leo with the careful assessment that had become habitual since the accident. For 3 months, she had been examined, evaluated, and discussed by an endless parade of medical professionals. Her expression showed the weary resignation of someone far too young to have learned that adults often brought disappointment, disguised as help. Owen approached Emma's bedside with a respect that immediately set him apart from the medical professionals who had preceded him. He didn't rush forward with false cheer or overwhelming enthusiasm. Instead, he moved slowly, allowing Emma to become comfortable with his presence. "Hello, Emma," Owen said, his voice carrying a warmth that was neither condescending nor artificially cheerful. "I heard about your accident, and I wanted to meet you because I think you might be interested in hearing Leo's story." Emma's gaze shifted to Leo, who stepped forward with the kind of confidence that only came from someone who had faced impossible challenges and emerged victorious. At 9 years old, Leo carried himself with a maturity that spoke of experiences far beyond his years. "Hi, Emma," Leo said, pulling a chair close to her bed. "My dad told me you hurt your back in a diving accident. I did the same thing when I was 6. He settled into the chair with easy familiarity, as though he had been visiting hospitalized friends his entire life. "Want to see my scars?" For the first time in weeks, Emma showed genuine interest in something. She nodded slightly, watching, as Leo lifted his shirt to reveal 2 small surgical scars on his lower back. "They had to put metal rods in my spine," Leo explained matter-of-factly. "The doctor said I would never walk again, that my legs would never work properly. But they were wrong." He looked directly at Emma, his young eyes serious but kind. "Sometimes doctors don't know everything, even when they think they do." Eleanor watched this interaction with fascination and growing unease. Leo's casual discussion of his own paralysis and recovery was exactly the kind of false hope she had been warned about. Yet there was something authentic about the boy's manner, something genuine in the way he spoke about his experience. "How long were you in a wheelchair?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. It was the first question she had asked anyone in 2 weeks. "About 8 months, Leo replied. "It was really hard at first. I was angry all the time, and I didn't want to do physical therapy because it hurt and seemed pointless. But my dad never gave up on me, even when I gave up on myself." Owen moved closer to Emma's bed, his attention focused completely on her, rather than on the impressive array of medical equipment surrounding her. "Emma, would it be all right if I examined your legs? I'd like to understand exactly what kind of injury we're dealing with." Eleanor's protective instincts flared. "Mr. Brooks, I appreciate your concern, but Emma has been examined by the best neurologists in the country. Her condition has been thoroughly evaluated." "I'm sure it has," Owen said calmly. "But sometimes a different perspective can reveal things that routine examinations miss. I'm not questioning the competence of Emma's medical team. I'm simply hoping that my experience with Leo might offer some insights." Emma looked at her mother, then back at Owen. "Will it hurt?" "Not at all," Owen promised. "I'm just going to touch your legs very lightly and ask you some questions. If you feel uncomfortable at any point, I'll stop immediately." Eleanor found herself nodding reluctantly. She positioned herself where she could intervene if necessary, watching closely as Owen began his examination. Owen's approach was unlike anything Eleanor had witnessed from the parade of specialists who had evaluated Emma. Where they had been clinical and detached, Owen was gentle and engaging. He spoke directly to Emma rather than about her, explaining each step of his examination in terms she could understand. "Emma, I want you to close your eyes and tell me if you feel anything when I touch your legs," Owen said, his hands moving with the precision of someone who had performed thousands of similar examinations. "Don't try to move anything. Just focus on whether you can sense my touch." For several minutes, Owen worked systematically along Emma's legs, occasionally asking questions, sometimes making small sounds of interest or surprise. Leo chatted quietly with Emma, distracting her from the clinical nature of the examination by telling her about his favorite video games and the treehouse he was building with his father. "Interesting," Owen murmured, his attention focused on Emma's feet. "Emma, I want you to try something for me. Don't worry about whether it works or not. I just want you to imagine that you're wiggling your toes. Don't strain or push, just think about moving them." Eleanor watched with the intensity of someone whose entire world depended on the next few moments. Emma's face scrunched with concentration. Her eyes closed tightly as she focused on the impossible task of moving toes that had been motionless for 3 months. "I can't feel anything," Emma said, disappointment evident in her voice. "That's all." "Right," Owen said reassuringly. "Feeling comes back gradually." "But Emma, look at your left foot." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. Emma's big toe was moving, not dramatically, but with a slight, unmistakable twitch that was clearly voluntary. Movement. "Oh my God," Eleanor whispered, rushing to Emma's bedside. "Emma, your toe moved. I saw it move." Emma's eyes flew open, and she stared down at her feet with an expression of amazement mixed with disbelief. "I did that? You absolutely did that?" Owen confirmed, his voice warm with encouragement. "Your brain is still connected to your legs, Emma. The pathways are damaged, but they're not destroyed. With the right kind of treatment, I believe we can help those connections get stronger." Eleanor felt the world shift around her. For 3 months, she had been told that Emma's paralysis was permanent, that the damage was complete and irreversible. Yet here was a man in work clothes who had identified movement that the most sophisticated medical equipment had missed. "How is this possible?" Eleanor asked, her voice shaking with emotions she couldn't quite identify. Owen smiled, the first genuinely optimistic expression Eleanor had seen in a medical setting since the accident. "Sometimes healing happens in ways that don't show up on traditional tests. Emma's injury is serious, but it's not hopeless. With the right approach, I believe she can walk again." For the first time in 3 months, Eleanor Harris allowed herself to believe that miracles might still be possible. The following weeks established a rhythm that gradually transformed the sterile atmosphere of Emma's hospital room into something that felt almost like hope. Owen arrived every morning at precisely 9 o'clock, carrying a worn leather satchel that contained an intriguing mixture of sophisticated medical equipment and what appeared to be simple toys. Leo accompanied him faithfully, his backpack filled with coloring books, small puzzles, and an ever-changing collection of items that seemed designed to make Emma smile. Eleanor had initially planned to monitor every session with the vigilance of a CEO overseeing a hostile takeover, but she found herself gradually relaxing as Owen's methods proved both gentle and effective. His approach to Emma's treatment was unlike anything she had witnessed in 3 months of consultations with world-renowned specialists. Where the previous medical team had focused exclusively on Emma's physical limitations, Owen treated her as a complete person whose emotional and psychological state were integral to her recovery. He never spoke about her injury in clinical terms, never discussed prognosis or statistical outcomes in her presence. never treated her like a collection of damaged nerve pathways rather than a 7-year-old girl who had lost her ability to dance. The brain learns best when it's engaged and curious, Owen explained to Eleanor one afternoon as they watched Emma and Leo work together on what appeared to be an elaborate art project. Traditional physical therapy often focuses on repetitive exercises that bore the patient and trigger resistance. But if we can make the therapy feel like play, the neural pathways form more readily. Eleanor watched in fascination as Owen demonstrated this principle in action. Instead of asking Emma to perform standard range of motion exercises, he would challenge her to help Leo build increasingly complex structures with colored blocks, positioning the materials so that Emma had to reach and stretch in precisely the ways her physical therapist had been trying to encourage. Emma, we need someone with really steady hands to hold this bridge while Leo adds the towers, Owen would say, positioning Emma's arms in exactly the therapeutic position the hospital staff had been attempting to achieve through direct instruction. The difference was remarkable. Where Emma had resisted the formal therapy, she eagerly participated in what felt like games with her new friend. Leo's role in Emma's treatment was perhaps the most extraordinary aspect of Owen's approach. The 9-year-old had an intuitive understanding of what Emma needed, sometimes surpassed even trained professionals. He never pitied Emma or treated her differently because of her paralysis, but he also never forgot that she was struggling with challenges that required patience and encouragement. "Want to see something cool?" Leo would ask, pulling out a small device that looked like a video game controller. "My dad invented this thing that helps your brain talk to your legs better. It's like a secret code that only your nervous system understands." The device was actually a sophisticated neural stimulation unit that Owen had designed during his years at Advanced Medical Systems, modified and refined based on his experience treating Leo. But in Leo's hands, it became an exciting piece of technology rather than intimidating medical equipment. Eleanor found herself staying later each day, drawn by the genuine progress she could see in Emma's condition. The daily assessments were showing consistent improvement in sensation and voluntary movement. More importantly, Emma's emotional state had transformed from resigned depression to cautious optimism. "Mama, watch this," Emma said one afternoon, her voice carrying an excitement that Eleanor hadn't heard since before the accident. Emma concentrated intensely, her face scrunched with effort, and managed to move her entire foot in a small but unmistakable circular motion. "That's incredible, sweetheart," Eleanor said, fighting back tears of joy and relief. She looked up at Owen, who was adjusting settings on one of his devices while maintaining the calm professional demeanor that had become familiar and reassuring. "The neural pathways are reconnecting faster than I expected," Owen said quietly, his voice carrying satisfaction mixed with something that might have been surprise. "Emma's young, and her nervous system has a remarkable capacity for healing. But she's also incredibly determined, which makes all the difference." As the sessions continued, Eleanor began to understand aspects of medicine that had always remained abstract despite her years in the pharmaceutical industry. She watched Owen work with Emma and began to comprehend the intricate relationship between hope and healing, between emotional state and physical recovery. Traditional medicine sometimes forgets that patients are human beings, not just collections of symptoms, Owen said one evening as they discussed Emma's progress. When someone is told they'll never walk again, that diagnosis becomes part of their identity. Breaking through that psychological barrier is often harder than repairing the physical damage. Eleanor found herself looking forward to these conversations with Owen, drawn by his unique perspective on medicine and healing. His combination of advanced technical knowledge and hard-won practical experience offered insights that she had never encountered in boardrooms or medical conferences. "You speak like someone who's had formal medical training," Eleanor observed one afternoon, studying Owen's precise technique as he adjusted Emma's neural stimulation equipment. Owen paused in his work, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I had a different life once," he said simply. "Before Leo's accident changed everything, I spent most of my time in laboratories and research facilities, working on problems that seemed more theoretical than personal." Eleanor sensed there was much more to Owen's story than he was revealing. But she respected his privacy. Whatever his background, his methods were producing results that exceeded anything she had dared to hope for. The most remarkable change was in Emma herself. The withdrawn, silent young person who had barely acknowledged the hospital staff was gradually being replaced by someone who resembled the vibrant daughter Eleanor remembered from before the accident. Emma looked forward to Owen and Leo's visits with an enthusiasm that reminded Eleanor of how Emma used to anticipate special outings or surprise presents. "Leo's teaching me about neural pathways," Emma announced one day, her voice filled with the kind of academic excitement that had always characterized her personality. "Did you know that your brain can grow new connections even after they've been damaged? It's like having superpowers, except they're inside your head." Eleanor smiled, recognizing her daughter's intellectual curiosity returning alongside her physical recovery. Emma had always been fascinated by how things worked, whether it was the machinery in Eleanor's pharmaceutical laboratories or the complex biological processes that Owen patiently explained during their sessions. "Owen says that believing you can get better is part of actually getting better," Emma continued, her 7-year-old logic carrying in wisdom that seemed far beyond her years. "He says the brain listens to what you tell it, so you have to be careful to tell it good things instead of scary things." As Eleanor tucked Emma into bed that evening, she realized that Owen had given them something more valuable than medical treatment. He had restored Emma's faith in her own future, had helped both of them believe that the accident didn't have to define the rest of Emma's life. For the first time since the diving accident, Eleanor felt genuinely optimistic about what lay ahead. Emma was not only recovering physically, but was also rediscovering the joy and curiosity that had always been her most defining characteristics. What Eleanor didn't know was that their newfound hope was about to be tested in ways she could never have imagined. 3 weeks after Owen Brooks first walked into Emma's hospital room, Eleanor Harris witnessed something that made her question everything she thought she understood about medical impossibilities. The morning had started like any other, with Owen and Leo arriving promptly at 9 o'clock. Their familiar routine now as much a part of the hospital rhythm as shift changes and medication rounds. Emma had been making steady progress, but the improvements had been incremental small movements, increased sensation, gradual strengthening of neural connections that had been damaged in the diving accident. Eleanor had learned to celebrate minor victories, a toe wiggle, a slight leg movement, the return of feeling in previously numb areas. Nothing had prepared her for what happened that Tuesday morning in October. "Today feels different," Emma announced, as Owen began setting up his equipment. There was something in her voice, a confidence that Eleanor hadn't heard since before the accident, that made both adults pause and pay closer attention. "Different how?" Owen asked, his experienced eye taking in details that others might miss. He had learned to read the subtle signs that indicated when a patient was ready for a breakthrough, and something in Emma's posture suggested that this might be a significant day. "I can feel my legs more today," Emma said, her 7-year-old vocabulary struggling to articulate the complex sensations she was experiencing. "It's like they've been asleep for a long time, and now they're starting to wake up." Leo, who had developed an almost supernatural ability to sense Emma's moods and needs, moved his chair closer to her bed. "That's exactly how it felt for me right before I started walking again," he said with the authority of someone who had navigated this journey before. "Like my legs were remembering how to be legs instead of just being parts of me that didn't work." Owen's expression grew more focused as he conducted his standard assessment of Emma's condition. His hands moved with practiced precision along her legs, testing reflexes and responses that had shown gradual improvement over the past 3 weeks. "Emma, I want to try something we haven't attempted before," Owen said, his voice carrying an excitement that he was trying to keep professional. "I think your neural pathways might be strong enough now for you to try bearing some weight on your legs." Eleanor felt her breath catch. The idea of Emma putting weight on her legs seemed simultaneously thrilling and terrifying. For 3 months, Emma had been completely dependent on her wheelchair, her legs unable to support even the slightest pressure. "Is it safe?" Eleanor asked, her protective instincts warring with her desperate hope for Emma's recovery. "We'll take it very slowly," Owen assured her. "Emma won't be standing on her own. I'll be supporting most of her weight. But if the neural connections are strong enough, she might be able to feel what it's like to be upright again." With careful precision, Owen maneuvered Emma to the edge of her hospital bed, Leo helping to arrange pillows and clear away medical equipment. Eleanor watched with the intensity of someone whose entire world depended on the next few minutes. "Okay, Emma," Owen said, positioning himself to support her weight while allowing her legs to make contact with the floor. "I want you to imagine that you're standing up to give your mom a hug. Don't worry about whether your legs can hold you. I've got you completely. Just think about what it feels like to be tall." Emma's face took on the expression of intense concentration that had become familiar during their therapy sessions. Her small hands gripped Owen's arms as he slowly helped her shift from sitting to an upright position. For a moment, nothing happened. Emma hung supported in Owen's arms, her feet touching the floor but carrying no weight, her legs seemingly as lifeless as they had been for the past 3 months. Then, almost imperceptibly, something changed. "I can feel the floor," Emma whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "I can feel my feet touching the ground." Owen's eyes met Eleanor's across the room, both adults recognizing the significance of what Emma was experiencing. Sensation was returning to areas that had been completely numb since the accident. "That's wonderful, Emma," Owen said encouragingly. "Now I want you to see if you can help me hold you up. Don't try to stand by yourself, but see if your legs want to help support your weight." What happened next was so remarkable that Eleanor would remember every detail for the rest of her life. Emma's legs, which had been completely paralyzed for 3 months, began to show signs of voluntary muscle engagement. Her knees straightened slightly, her ankles adjusted for balance. Her entire lower body seemed to remember its purpose. "Mama, look!" Emma exclaimed, her voice carrying pure joy. "I'm standing!" Eleanor rushed to Emma's side, tears streaming down her face as she watched her daughter experience something that doctors had declared impossible. Emma wasn't standing independently. Owen was still supporting most of her weight, but her legs were clearly participating in the effort. "This is incredible," Eleanor said, her voice shaking with emotion. "Emma, you're really doing it." Leo jumped up from his chair, clapping and cheering as though Emma had just won an Olympic medal. "I knew you could do it," he shouted. "I told you your legs just needed time to remember how to work." For several minutes, Owen helped Emma maintain her upright position, allowing her to experience the sensation of being vertical, of feeling her feet make contact with the ground, of having her legs participate in supporting her body weight. It was a small miracle measured in seconds, but it represented a monumental victory in the long journey toward recovery. When Owen finally helped Emma back onto her bed, all 4 of them were crying, Emma with joy and pride, Eleanor with relief and gratitude, Leo with the satisfaction of seeing his prediction come true, and Owen with the quiet fulfillment that came from witnessing a medical impossibility become reality. "How is this possible?" Eleanor asked, her scientific mind struggling to process what she had just witnessed. 3 months ago, the specialists said Emma would never walk again. They said the damage was permanent and complete. Owen settled into his chair, his expression thoughtful and serious. Sometimes the medical establishment gets so focused on what they've seen before that they forget to look for what might be possible, he said. Emma's injury was severe, but it wasn't as complete as the initial scans suggested. More importantly, her brain has been working to establish new neural pathways, alternative routes for communication between her mind and her legs. Eleanor looked at her daughter, who was examining her legs with newfound fascination, flexing muscles that had been motionless for months. The human nervous system has an extraordinary capacity for healing, Owen continued. But that healing requires the right kind of stimulation, the right emotional environment, and most importantly, the belief that recovery is possible. Emma had all of those things. As Eleanor watched Emma demonstrate her returning leg movement for the nursing staff who had rushed in after hearing the commotion, she realized that Owen had given them something more precious than medical treatment. He had restored their faith in miracles. That evening, as Emma slept more peacefully than she had since the accident, Eleanor sat beside her bed and allowed herself to imagine a future she had thought was lost forever. Emma dancing again, running through the halls of Harris Pharmaceutical, growing up to inherit not just a company, but the unshakable belief that no problem was truly unsolvable. What Eleanor didn't know was that their moment of triumph was about to be overshadowed by revelations that would threaten to destroy everything. Owen had built the mahogany conference table in Eleanor. Harris's executive boardroom had witnessed countless high-stakes meetings, but the tension crackling through the air that Thursday morning was unlike anything the room had ever contained. Eleanor sat at the head of the table, her posture rigid with barely controlled anger, while Dr. Victoria Sterling Harris, Pharmaceuticals Chief Medical Officer, spread documents across the polished surface like evidence in a criminal trial. "I felt obligated to bring this to your attention immediately," Dr. Sterling said, her voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to delivering unwelcome news to corporate executives. "Our legal department received an anonymous tip about Owen Brooks yesterday evening. What we discovered is deeply concerning." Eleanor stared at the papers before her, feeling as though the world had tilted sideways. Medical journal articles, court documents, newspaper clippings, and official correspondence were arranged in neat stacks, each pile representing a different aspect of Owen's professional downfall. The headlines were damning. "Stanford researcher loses license after experimental treatment death." "Medical device company settles wrongful death suit and disgraced scientist disappears after ethics investigation." The most recent articles were dated 4 years earlier, around the time Owen had told her his life had changed dramatically. "Dr. Owen Brooks," Dr. Sterling continued, consulting her notes with clinical precision, "was stripped of his medical license by the Arizona State Medical Board, following the death of a patient who had been participating in an unauthorized experimental treatment protocol. The patient was a 3-year-old boy named Leo Brooks, his own son." Eleanor's blood ran cold. Leo was alive, healthy, vibrant. She had watched him play with Emma just yesterday. The contradiction made no sense, yet the documents before her seemed official and comprehensive. "According to the medical board's findings," Dr. Sterling pressed on, "Dr. Brooks used his son as a test subject for an unproven neural stimulation device that he had developed without proper clinical trials or FDA approval. The treatment resulted in complications that led to the death." "That's impossible," Eleanor said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Leo is alive. He's healthy. I've seen him every day for weeks." Dr. Sterling's expression showed the patient sympathy of someone explaining complex medical issues to a grieving family member. "Eleanor, I understand that you've been under tremendous stress since Emma's accident. It's not uncommon for desperate parents to be manipulated by individuals who prey on their vulnerability. This Owen Brooks, whoever he really is, may have been using another person's identity, or perhaps fabricating his entire story." Eleanor's mind raced through her interactions with Owen, searching for signs of deception she might have missed. His medical knowledge seemed genuine, his equipment sophisticated, his treatment methods producing undeniable results. Yet the evidence before her painted a picture of a disgraced researcher who had killed his own son through reckless experimentation. "There's more," Dr. Sterling said, pulling out another set of documents. "Advanced Medical Systems, the company where Brooks claimed to work, has no record of anyone by that name ever being employed there. The research papers he supposedly published don't exist in any legitimate medical journals. Everything about his professional background appears to be fabricated." Eleanor felt sick. She had trusted Owen with Emma's life, had allowed him unprecedented access to her vulnerable daughter, had begun to believe that miracles were possible. If Dr. Sterling was right, then Eleanor had been the victim of an elaborate con game that had put Emma at serious risk. "What about Emma's improvement?" Eleanor asked, grasping for something that might explain away the devastating revelations. "She's been making remarkable progress. Yesterday she was able to bear weight on her legs for the first time since the accident." "Placebo effect," Dr. Sterling said with clinical certainty. "It's well documented that patients can experience temporary improvements when they believe they're receiving effective treatment, even if that treatment is medically worthless. Emma's apparent progress could be psychological rather than physiological." Eleanor's phone buzzed with a text message from Owen, running a few minutes late this morning. "Leo had a dentist appointment. See you at 9:15, the casual normalcy of." The message felt obscene in light of what she had just learned. "I've already contacted hospital security," Dr. Sterling continued. "Owen Brooks and the boy he's been bringing with him are to be denied access to the hospital immediately. I've also taken the liberty of scheduling Emma for a comprehensive neurological evaluation with Dr. Peterson's team to assess any potential damage from whatever treatments Brooks has been administering." Eleanor stared out the conference room. Windows at the Phoenix skyline, the familiar view now seeming foreign and threatening. 3 weeks ago, she had been a desperate mother watching her daughter slip away into permanent paralysis. Owen's arrival had brought hope, progress, and the first genuine smile she had seen from Emma since the accident. Now she was being told that everything had been a lie. "There's something else you need to know," Dr. Sterling said, her voice dropping to a more ominous tone. "The anonymous tip that led us to investigate Brooks came with a warning. According to our source, Brooks has been targeting wealthy families with injured people, offering miracle cures in exchange for substantial financial payments. The implication is that you and Emma were selected as his next victims." Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the conference room's air conditioning. She had been so grateful for Owen's help, so impressed by his methods, so hopeful about Emma's recovery, that she had never considered the possibility of exploitation. "Has he asked you for money?" Dr. Sterling inquired. Eleanor shook her head. Slowly, Owen had never mentioned payment, had never suggested that his treatment required financial compensation. But perhaps that was part of his strategy: establish trust first, demonstrate results, then present a bill for services rendered. "I need to see these documents myself," Eleanor said, reaching for the papers with hands that trembled slightly. "I need to understand exactly what kind of person I've been trusting with my daughter." As Eleanor read through the medical board findings, court documents, and newspaper articles, a picture emerged of a brilliant researcher whose grief over his son's death had driven him to increasingly desperate and unethical behavior. The official records painted Owen as a man who had lost everything: his career, his reputation, his family, and had apparently decided to rebuild his life through deception and exploitation. Yet something didn't add up. The Owen Brooks described in these documents was a different person from the gentle, competent man who had been treating Emma. The dates were wrong, the details contradictory, the entire narrative inconsistent with what Eleanor had observed firsthand. "I want to confront him," Eleanor said finally, closing the last folder with a snap that echoed through the conference room. "When he arrives this morning, I want to hear his explanation for all of this." Dr. Sterling looked concerned. Eleanor, I don't think that's wise. If this man is as dangerous as these documents suggest, he's been alone with my daughter for 3 weeks. Eleanor interrupted, her voice carrying the steel that had made her one of the most formidable CEOs in the pharmaceutical industry. If he's some kind of predator or con artist, I need to know immediately. And if there's some other explanation for these documents, I need to hear it directly from him. As Eleanor prepared to leave the conference room, her phone rang with a call from the hospital. Emma was asking where Owen and Leo were, wondering why her therapy session had been canceled. Worried that something had happened to her new friends, Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling the weight of a decision that could determine not just Emma's physical recovery, but her emotional well-being as well. In less than an hour, she would have to choose between protecting her daughter from a potentially dangerous imposter or destroying the relationship that had brought Emma back from the brink of despair. Either way, Eleanor realized someone she trusted was about to betray her. Eleanor Harris had faced hostile takeovers, congressional hearings, and FDA investigations during her 20-year career building Harris Pharmaceutical Industries, but none of those experiences had prepared her for the conversation she was about to have. She sat in Emma's hospital room at 9:20 a.m., the damning documents spread across the bedside table like accusations waiting to be answered. Watching the door for Owen Brooks's arrival, Emma had been asking increasingly worried questions about why her therapy session was delayed, why Owen and Leo weren't there yet, whether something bad had happened to her friends. Eleanor had deflected these questions with vague reassurances, but she could see the anxiety building in her daughter's eyes, the same fearful uncertainty that had characterized Emma's emotional state immediately after the accident. When Owen finally appeared in the doorway, Leo's hand in his as always, Eleanor felt her heart constrict with conflicting emotions. The man who entered looked exactly like the gentle, competent healer who had brought hope back into their lives. His smile was warm and genuine as he greeted Emma, his concern evident when he noticed her distressed expression. "Sorry, we're running late, Emma," Owen said, moving toward his usual position beside her bed. "Leo had a dentist appointment this morning, and you know how those can go." "Owen," Eleanor said, her voice carrying a formality that made him pause and look at her more carefully. "We need to talk." "Leo, would you mind waiting in the hallway for a few minutes?" Owen's expression shifted as he registered the tension in the room, the official-looking documents on the table, the way Eleanor had positioned herself between him and Emma. "Of course," he said quietly, guiding Leo back toward the door. "Leo, why don't you go ask the nurses if they have any of those coloring books you like?" As soon as they were alone, Eleanor stood and faced Owen directly, every instinct from her corporate career telling her to take control of the situation immediately. "I know who you really are," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest. "Or rather, I know what you've done." Owen's face went very still, but he didn't attempt to deny or deflect. Instead, he moved slowly to the chair he usually occupied during Emma's sessions and sat down with the careful movements of someone who understood that his next words would determine everything. "What exactly do you think you know?" he asked, his voice quiet but not defensive. Eleanor picked up the medical board findings and held them out like evidence in a trial. Dr. Owen Brooks, formerly of Advanced Medical Systems, medical license revoked by the Arizona State Medical Board, following the death of a 3-year-old patient who died during unauthorized experimental treatment. "The patient was your own son, Leo Brooks." Owen's eyes closed briefly, and when he opened them again, Eleanor saw a depth of pain that seemed to reach back years. "The medical board findings are accurate," he said simply. "My license was revoked, and Leo was declared dead following complications from an experimental treatment I administered." Eleanor felt the world shift beneath her feet. She had been hoping for a denial, an explanation that would reveal the documents to be forgeries or mistakes. Owen's confirmation felt like a physical blow. "Emma, sweetheart," Eleanor said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. Mr. Brooks isn't who we thought he was. He's going to leave now, and we're going to make sure you get proper medical care from qualified doctors." Emma's reaction was immediate and devastating. "No," she cried, struggling to sit up straighter in her bed. "Owen isn't leaving. He's helping me walk again. Why are you being mean to him?" "Emma, he lied to us," Eleanor said, kneeling beside her daughter's bed. "The documents prove that he's dangerous, that he hurt his own son. We can't trust him to help you." "But Leo is fine," Emma protested, tears streaming down her face. "Leo is my friend. He's not dead. Why are you saying these terrible things?" Owen remained silent during this exchange, his hands folded in his lap, his expression carrying the resignation of someone who had been through similar conversations before. When Emma looked at him pleadingly, he met her gaze with gentle sadness. "Emma," Owen said softly, "your mother is trying to protect you. The documents she has are real, and they say exactly what she told you they say." Eleanor felt a mixture of vindication and heartbreak as Owen confirmed her accusations. But before she could respond, he continued speaking. "What the documents don't say is that Leo did die, exactly as they report. His heart stopped for 4 minutes and 37 seconds during the experimental treatment. The medical board was correct to revoke my license because I had crossed every ethical boundary in modern medicine." Emma's crying intensified, but Owen continued with the same calm voice he had used during their therapy sessions. "But Leo came back," Owen said, looking directly at Eleanor. 4 minutes and 37 seconds after his heart stopped, it started beating again. The neural pathways that had been damaged by his original injury began to function normally. Within 6 months, he had recovered completely. Eleanor stared at Owen, trying to process what he was telling her. "That's impossible," she said. "People don't just come back from clinical death, especially not with full neurological recovery." "No, they don't," Owen agreed. "Which is why the medical board refused to consider the possibility that Leo had actually survived. By the time he was walking, normally, the bureaucratic process had already concluded that he was dead. Officially, Leo Brooks died 4 years ago from complications of experimental treatment administered by his father." Eleanor's mind raced through the implications of Owen's story. If he was telling the truth, then Leo was living proof of medical resurrection, a miracle so unprecedented that the medical establishment couldn't acknowledge it, without questioning everything they believed about death and recovery. "Where is Leo now?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "In the hallway, asking the nurses about coloring books," Owen replied. "The same boy who has been coming here every day for 3 weeks. The same young person who has been helping Emma believe that recovery is possible." Before Eleanor could respond, the door opened and Dr. Sterling entered with 2 hospital security guards. "Mrs. Harris, we've received reports of a disturbance. Mr. Brooks, you need to come with us immediately." "Wait," Eleanor said, standing between Owen and the security guards. "There are things that don't add up here. I need more time to understand what's happening." Dr. Sterling's expression showed professional concern, mixed with impatience. "Eleanor, I understand that you've developed an emotional attachment to this man, but the facts are clear. He's a dangerous individual who lost his medical license after killing his own son. We cannot allow him continued access to Emma." "But his son is alive," Eleanor said, feeling as though she were defending something she didn't fully understand. Herself, "Leo is healthy and vibrant. I've seen him every day." "Eleanor," Dr. Sterling said gently, "Leo Brooks died 4 years ago. Whatever child this man has been bringing to the hospital, it isn't his son. We believe he may be using someone else's identity as part of an elaborate deception." The room fell silent except for Emma's quiet sobbing. Eleanor looked from Dr. Sterling to Owen, trying to determine which version of reality she should trust. There's something else, Dr. Sterling continued. The Neurological Institute of Switzerland has agreed to evaluate Emma for their experimental spinal cord regeneration program. Dr. Klaus Weber, who developed the treatment, will be flying in tomorrow to assess her case personally. This is exactly the kind of legitimate, cutting-edge care that Emma needs. Eleanor's pharmaceutical background immediately recognized the significance of what Dr. Sterling was offering. The Swiss Neurological Institute was legendary for their breakthrough treatments, their impeccable safety record, their peer-reviewed research published in the most prestigious medical journals. Dr. Weber's spinal regeneration program had been featured on the cover of Nature Medicine just 6 months earlier. It was everything. Owen's approach was not institutional, documented, backed by years of careful research and clinical trials. If Emma was accepted into the Swiss program, she would receive treatment from the most respected spinal injury specialists in the world, using methods that had been proven safe and effective through rigorous scientific study. Emma would need to be transferred to Zurich within 48 hours, Dr. Sterling explained. The treatment protocol requires a specific timeline, and Dr. Weber has agreed to make room in his schedule only if we can move quickly. Eleanor looked at Emma, who was staring at Owen with desperate hope, then at Owen himself, who sat quietly waiting for her decision. The choice couldn't have been more stark. Trust a disgraced researcher whose own son had allegedly died from his experimental treatments, or accept help from the most prestigious medical institution in the world. Emma, Eleanor said, kneeling beside her daughter's bed, the doctors in Switzerland have special equipment that can help people with spinal injuries. Dr. Weber has helped hundreds of patients walk again using proven methods. Emma's response was immediate and heartbreaking. I don't want to go to Switzerland, she said, her voice small but determined. I want to stay here with Owen and Leo. They understand about my legs in a way that the other doctors don't. Sweetheart, the Swiss doctors are the best in the world, Eleanor said gently. They have success rates that are much higher than anything else available. But I'm already getting better here, Emma insisted. Yesterday I stood up. Owen says, Emma's neural pathways are reconnecting faster than he expected. Why do I need to go somewhere else when the treatment is already working? Eleanor felt torn between her rational mind, which recognized the superiority of the Swiss program, and her emotional attachment to the progress Emma had made with Owen. The documents painted Owen as a dangerous charlatan, but Emma's improvement had been undeniable. Mrs. Harris, Owen said quietly, may I speak with you privately for a moment? Eleanor hesitated, then nodded to the security guards to wait outside. When they were alone except for Emma, Owen stood and faced her directly. 4 years ago, I made a choice to save my son's life using methods that existed outside the boundaries of approved medical practice, Owen said. That choice cost me my career, my reputation, and my standing in the medical community. But Leo is alive because I was willing to risk everything for him. Owen moved to the window, looking out at the Phoenix skyline. The Swiss program is excellent. Dr. Weber is a brilliant researcher, and his methods are safe and well documented. Emma would receive world-class care, and she would likely recover significant function over the course of several years. Eleanor waited for the but that she could hear coming. But Emma's injury is responding to treatment in ways that suggest she could achieve complete recovery, not just partial improvement. The neural regeneration I'm seeing in her case is unprecedented, possibly because we began treatment so soon. After the accident, possibly because of her age, possibly because of factors we don't fully understand yet. Owen turned back to face Eleanor. If you transfer Emma to Switzerland, she will receive safe, proven treatment that will help her walk again. If you allow me to continue working with her, she might achieve something that medical science considers impossible. Eleanor felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. The safe choice was clear: trust the established medical system, accept proven treatments, protect Emma from any possibility of harm. The risky choice meant trusting a man who had allegedly killed his own son, believing in treatment methods that had no scientific validation, gambling Emma's future on possibilities that might exist only in Owen's imagination. "How do I know you're telling the truth about Leo?" Eleanor asked. "How do I know that everything you've told me isn't part of some elaborate deception?" Owen was quiet for a long moment, then pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "Leo," he said when the call connected, "could you come back to Emma's room, please? And would you bring your medical records from Phoenix General? The ones from 4 years ago." Within minutes, Leo appeared in the doorway carrying a manila folder that looked official and well-worn. He handed it to Eleanor without being asked, his young face serious but unafraid. Eleanor opened the folder and found herself looking at medical records that documented the treatment of a 3-year-old Leo Brooks for severe spinal injury, followed by complications during experimental neural stimulation therapy, followed by cardiac arrest and clinical death, lasting 4 minutes and 37 seconds, followed by spontaneous recovery and complete neurological healing. The documents were stamped, signed, and dated. They included brain scans showing Leo's recovery, cardiac monitors documenting his death and resurrection, and detailed notes from hospital staff who had witnessed events they couldn't explain. At the bottom of the file was a death certificate for Leo Brooks, officially declaring him deceased, and beneath that, a handwritten note from the attending physician. Patient unexpectedly regained consciousness in full neurological function approximately 18 hours after official time of death. Medical explanation unavailable. Family declined autopsy. Case closed by administrative decision. Eleanor stared at the documents, then at Leo, who was very much alive and looking at her with patient understanding. "The medical board was correct to revoke my license," Owen said quietly. "By every standard of medical ethics and professional practice, I had acted irresponsibly and dangerously. The fact that Leo survived and recovered completely doesn't change the fact that I crossed lines that should never be crossed." Eleanor looked at Emma, who was watching this conversation with the intense focus of someone whose entire future hung in the balance. "But sometimes," Owen continued, "the only way to save someone you love is to be willing to risk everything, including your own destruction, for the possibility of a miracle." Eleanor closed the medical file and handed it back to Leo, her mind struggling to process everything she had learned. The documents she had been shown that morning painted Owen as a dangerous fraud. The documents Leo had just shared suggested that Owen was someone who had achieved the impossible at enormous personal cost. "Emma," Eleanor said, sitting on the edge of her daughter's bed, "if we don't go to Switzerland, if we continue with Owen's treatment, there are no guarantees. There's no medical institution backing up his methods, no insurance coverage for his approach, no safety net if something goes wrong." Emma reached for her mother's hand. "Mama, I know Owen's treatment is working, because I can feel my legs getting stronger every day. The Swiss doctors might be really good, but they haven't been working with me. They don't know how my neural pathways are healing or what my brain needs to reconnect with my legs." Eleanor felt tears welling in her eyes as she recognized her own determination and stubbornness reflected in her 7-year-old daughter's words. "Are you sure?" Eleanor asked. "Are you absolutely sure that you want to stay here instead of going to the best medical program in the world?" Emma nodded solemnly. "I'm sure. Owen and Leo helped me believe I could walk again when everyone else said it was impossible. I trust them." Eleanor looked at Owen, who was waiting quietly for her decision, his entire future depending on whether she chose to believe in possibilities that existed beyond the boundaries of conventional wisdom. "Dr. Sterling isn't going to understand this decision," Eleanor said finally. "The medical board findings are real, the risks are enormous, and I'll be gambling Emma's recovery on treatments that have no scientific validation." "That's correct," Owen agreed. "You would be choosing hope over certainty, possibility over proven methods, trust over institutional authority. Eleanor stood up and walked to the door, where Dr. Sterling and the security guards were waiting. She opened it and faced the woman who had been trying to protect her from making a terrible mistake. "Dr. Sterling, please call the Swiss program and tell them we won't be needing their services," Eleanor said, her voice carrying the authority that had made her one of the most successful pharmaceutical executives in the world. "Emma will be continuing her treatment here with Owen Brooks." Dr. Sterling's face showed shock and professional concern. "Eleanor, I cannot recommend this course of action. The legal liability alone is my responsibility," Eleanor interrupted. "Owen, you have my permission to continue Emma's treatment. But I want daily progress reports, complete transparency about your methods, and the first sign of any complication. Means we transfer Emma to conventional care immediately." Owen nodded solemnly. "You have my word." As Dr. Sterling left with obvious disapproval and the security guards dispersed, Eleanor sat back down beside Emma's bed and realized that she had just made the same choice Owen had made 4 years earlier to risk everything for the possibility of a miracle. She only hoped that her faith would be rewarded, the same way his had been. 6 months after Eleanor, Harris had made the most important business decision of her life, choosing to trust Owen Brooks. Over the Swiss Neurological Institute, she stood at the back of the grand ballroom at the Phoenix Renaissance Hotel, watching her daughter Emma take steps that medical science had declared impossible. The occasion was the inaugural gala for the Harris Brooks Foundation for Neural Recovery, an organization that Eleanor had established to fund research into unconventional treatments for spinal cord injuries. The ballroom was filled with an unlikely mixture of pharmaceutical executives, medical researchers, grateful families, and journalists who had come to witness what was being called the Phoenix Miracle. Emma, now 8 years old and walking with only a slight limp that was barely noticeable unless you were looking for it, stood at the podium with the poise of someone who had learned that overcoming impossible odds was simply another part of life. Her dark hair was pulled back in an elegant bun, and she wore a navy blue dress that Eleanor had chosen specifically because it was the same color Emma had been wearing the day of the diving accident. "Ladies and gentlemen," Emma said, her voice carrying clearly through the sound system, "I want to tell you about 2 people who taught me that sometimes the best doctors don't work in hospitals, and sometimes the best medicine doesn't come in bottles." Eleanor felt tears welling in her eyes as she watched her daughter, who 6 months earlier had been told she would never walk again, standing confidently before an audience of 300 people. The journey from that desperate hospital room to this moment of triumph had been filled with challenges, setbacks, and moments of doubt that had tested every assumption Eleanor had ever held about medicine, healing, and the nature of miracles. The early weeks of Emma's continued treatment with Owen had been fraught with tension. Dr. Sterling had documented her objections in writing. Hospital administrators had expressed concerns about liability, and Eleanor had found herself defending her decision to colleagues who questioned her judgment. The pharmaceutical industry was built on proven protocols and peer-reviewed research, not on faith in disgraced researchers whose methods existed outside established medical practice. But Emma's progress had been undeniable. Week by week, her strength had increased, her mobility had improved, and her neural pathways had reconnected in ways that astonished even Owen. The breakthrough moments had come in small increments, at first standing independently for 30 seconds, taking a single step while holding Owen's hands, walking 3 feet between parallel bars. The major turning point had occurred on a Tuesday morning in December, almost 4 months after Owen's identity crisis had nearly ended their relationship. Emma had been working with Owen and Leo in the hospital's physical therapy room, practicing balance exercises that were designed to strengthen the communication between her brain and her legs. "I want to try walking to the window by myself," Emma had announced with the matter-of-fact determination that had become her trademark. "I think my legs are ready." Eleanor, who had been reading emails in the corner of the room, looked up to see Emma positioned herself at one end of the therapy room, approximately 15 feet from the large windows that overlooked Phoenix's downtown skyline. It was the farthest distance Emma had ever attempted to walk independently. "Are you sure?" Owen had asked, his professional caution warring with his recognition that Emma often knew her capabilities better than anyone else. "I'm sure," Emma had replied, and something in her voice suggested that this was going to be different from their previous attempts. What happened next was captured on the cell phone video that Leo had been recording for Emma's progress journal, a video that would eventually be seen by millions of people around the world. Emma took her first step with confidence, then her second, then found her rhythm and walked steadily across the room with a grace that seemed to defy everything the medical establishment believed about spinal cord recovery. When she reached the window and turned around with a smile of pure joy, Owen had been crying openly for the first time since Eleanor had met him. Leo had cheered so loudly that nurses had come running from other parts of the hospital. And Eleanor had felt something fundamental shift inside her, a recognition that she had witnessed not just medical recovery, but genuine resurrection. Cell phone video had been shared first with Emma's extended family, then with close friends, then with colleagues at Harris Pharmaceutical who couldn't believe what they were seeing. Within weeks, the video had gone viral, attracting attention from medical journalists, research institutions, and families around the world who were dealing with similar injuries. The attention had been both gratifying and overwhelming. Eleanor had found herself fielding calls from medical reporters who wanted to understand how Emma's recovery had been achieved, from research institutions that wanted to study Owen's methods, and from desperate families who were seeking the same kind of miracle for their own children. More significantly, the publicity had led to a formal review of Owen's case by the Arizona State Medical Board. 3 independent neurologists had examined Emma and confirmed that her recovery was medically unprecedented. Dr. Patricia Williamson, the board's chief investigator, had spent 2 weeks reviewing Leo's medical records and interviewing hospital staff who had witnessed his death and resurrection 4 years earlier. The board's final report, issued just 2 months before the Foundation Gala, had been a masterpiece of medical diplomacy. While acknowledging that Owen's original treatment of Leo had violated established protocols, the report concluded that both Leo's and Emma's recoveries represented extraordinary outcomes that warrant further investigation rather than continued professional censure. Owen's medical license had been restored with the unusual stipulation that his research would be conducted under the oversight of a medical ethics board, and that his methods would be documented for peer review. It was a compromise that allowed Owen to continue his work while providing the institutional oversight that the medical establishment required. Now, as Eleanor watched Emma address the Foundation Gala, she marveled at how much their lives had changed. Emma was no longer the withdrawn, silent patient who had lost hope in her future. She had become an advocate for other young people with spinal injuries, a spokesperson for unconventional medical research, and a living example of what was possible when determination met opportunity. 6 months ago, I couldn't move my legs. Emma continued, her voice growing stronger as she warmed to her subject. The doctors told my mom that I would never walk again, that I would need to learn to live with a wheelchair, that I should accept my new reality. But Dr. Owen Brooks and his son Leo taught me that sometimes the most impossible things are just waiting for someone brave enough to try them. Eleanor's eyes found Owen in the audience, sitting at a table near the front with Leo beside him. Owen was wearing a suit for the first time since Eleanor had known him. She had insisted on taking him shopping for appropriate formal wear, but he still carried himself with the same quiet dignity that had characterized their first meeting. Leo, now 10 years old and serving as the Foundation's youngest board member, was wearing a tie that matched his father's and taking his role as official photographer very seriously. The 6 months since Eleanor's decision to trust Owen had transformed more than just Emma's medical condition. Owen had been invited to present his research at 3 major medical conferences, had been offered consulting positions with 2 pharmaceutical companies, and had received funding requests from research institutions in 7 countries. The garage laboratory in Flagstaff had been replaced by a state-of-the-art research facility that Eleanor had built on the Harris Pharmaceutical campus, complete with the most advanced neural monitoring equipment available. More importantly, Owen had been given the platform to help other patients who had been told their conditions were hopeless. The Harris Brooks Foundation had already funded treatment for 12 young people with spinal cord injuries, with preliminary results suggesting that Owen's methods might be applicable to a wide range of neurological conditions. But the most important thing Dr. Brooks taught me, Emma continued, is that healing isn't just about fixing what's broken in your body. It's about believing in yourself even when everyone else has given up on you. It's about having people in your life who see possibilities instead of limitations. And it's about never, ever accepting that impossible means forever. The audience erupted in applause, and Eleanor felt a pride that went far beyond anything she had experienced during her years building Harris Pharmaceutical. Emma had not only recovered from her injury, but had become someone who could inspire others to believe in their own potential for healing. As Emma concluded her remarks and invited Owen to join her at the podium, Eleanor reflected on how profoundly the experience had changed her own understanding of medicine, business, and life itself. For 20 years, she had built her pharmaceutical empire on the premise that medical problems could be solved through research, development, and proven protocols. Emma's recovery had taught her that sometimes the most important breakthroughs came from people who were willing to venture beyond the boundaries of established knowledge. Owen approached the microphone with the same careful dignity he had shown during Emma's darkest moments in the hospital. The man who had once been dismissed as a dangerous charlatan was now being introduced as the Foundation's Director of Research, a position that came with a generous salary, unlimited research funding, and the institutional support he had been denied for 4 years. "Thank you, Emma," Owen said, his voice carrying the warmth that had first convinced Eleanor to trust him with her daughter's life. "And thank you to everyone who believed that recovery was possible, even when the medical establishment said it wasn't." Owen paused, his eyes finding Eleanor in the back of the room. 6 months ago, Eleanor Harris made one of the most difficult decisions any parent can make. She chose to trust an unknown treatment approach over proven medical protocols. She chose hope over certainty, possibility over safety, faith over institutional authority. That decision didn't just save Emma's ability to walk, it saved Emma's belief in her own future. Eleanor felt a flush of recognition as the audience turned to acknowledge her. She had spent most of her career behind the scenes, building her company through strategic decisions and careful planning. This was the first time she had been publicly recognized for a choice that had been based entirely on intuition and love rather than business logic. But Eleanor's courage also saved something else, Owen continued. "It saved my faith in the possibility that medical miracles don't have to be abandoned just because they can't be easily explained or replicated in controlled studies." The Harris Brooks Foundation represents a new model for medical research, one that combines rigorous scientific methodology with the willingness to explore treatments that exist outside conventional boundaries. Owen gestured toward a large screen that displayed photos of the 12 young people who had received treatment through the Foundation's program. Each photo showed a before and after comparison, documenting recovery that ranged from partial improvement to complete restoration of function. These young people and their families represent the future of neurological medicine, Owen said. They are living proof that the word incurable should never be the end of a conversation about healing. With continued research, proper documentation, and the kind of institutional support that the Harris Brooks Foundation provides, we believe that spinal cord recovery can move from miraculous exception to standard treatment option. The audience's applause was enthusiastic and sustained, but Eleanor noticed that the loudest cheering was coming from a section of tables where the Foundation's patients and their families were seated. These were people who had lived through their own versions of Emma's journey, who had made their own impossible choices between accepting medical limitations and believing in possibilities that existed beyond proven protocols. As Owen concluded his remarks and Emma returned to the podium for closing comments, Eleanor felt a hand on her shoulder. She turned to find Dr. Patricia Williamson, the medical board investigator who had been instrumental in restoring Owen's license. "Mrs. Harris," Dr. Williamson said, "I wanted to thank you personally for having the courage to challenge our assumptions about what constitutes acceptable medical practice. Emma's recovery has forced the entire neurological community to reconsider what we think we know about spinal cord injuries." Eleanor smiled, remembering her own journey from skepticism to faith over the past 6 months. "Dr. Williamson, 6 months ago, I would have agreed with every decision the medical board made regarding Owen's case. Sometimes the most important learning happens when we're forced to question our most fundamental assumptions." Dr. Williamson nodded thoughtfully. "The Harris Brooks Foundation is receiving attention from research institutions around the world. We're fielding inquiries from neurologists who want to understand Owen's methods, from medical schools that want to incorporate his approach into their curricula, from pharmaceutical companies that want to develop treatments based on his protocols." Eleanor felt a familiar stirring of business opportunity, but this time it was tempered by something deeper, a recognition that Emma's recovery had taught her about the limitations of treating healing as simply another market opportunity. "The Foundation isn't interested in commercializing Owen's methods," Eleanor said firmly. "Our goal is to make these treatments available to any family that needs them, regardless of their ability to pay. Emma's recovery shouldn't become another luxury service available only to wealthy families." Dr. Williamson looked surprised. Eleanor's pharmaceutical company had built its fortune on proprietary treatments that commanded premium prices in global markets. The decision to make Owen's methods freely available represented a fundamental shift in her business philosophy. "We're establishing treatment centers in 12 cities over the next 2 years, Eleanor continued. "Each center will be staffed by researchers trained in Owen's protocols, and each center will treat patients regardless of their insurance coverage or financial resources. The Foundation's endowment will ensure that these services remain free to families who need them." As the gala concluded and guests began to mingle during the reception, Eleanor found herself surrounded by families whose children had been helped by the Foundation's program. The stories were remarkably similar to Emma's young people who had been told their injuries were permanent, parents who had exhausted conventional options, moments of desperation that had led to the decision to try Owen's unconventional approach. But each story also had its own unique elements, its own moments of breakthrough and triumph. A 15-year-old football player from Denver who had regained the ability to walk after 6 months of treatment. A 9-year-old girl from Seattle whose riding accident had left her paralyzed, but who was now competing in junior equestrian events. A 12-year-old boy from Chicago who had been injured in a bicycle accident and was now planning to try out for his middle school basketball team. These young people and their families represented something more significant than medical success stories. They represented a new understanding of what was possible when courage met opportunity, when established limitations were challenged by people who refused to accept that impossible meant forever. Later that evening, after the guests had departed and the ballroom had been cleared, Eleanor found herself in Emma's room at their Scottsdale home, participating in the same bedtime ritual they had maintained since Emma was 3 years old. "Mama," Emma said as Eleanor tucked her in, "do you think other kids will get better the way I did?" Eleanor considered the question carefully. The Foundation had been operational for only 3 months, and while the initial results were promising, she knew that Emma's recovery was still considered extraordinary by medical standards. "I think," Eleanor said finally, that you and Owen and Leo have shown the world that sometimes the most important healing happens when people believe in possibilities that others think are impossible. Whether other young people recover the way you did depends on a lot of factors we don't fully understand yet. Emma nodded solemnly, then brightened. But at least now they have a chance, right? Before Owen came to help me, kids like us didn't have any chance at all. Now we have the foundation, and we have doctors who know how to help neural pathways reconnect. And we have families who know that sometimes you have to choose hope over safety. Eleanor smiled, recognizing her own business philosophy reflected in her 8-year-old daughter's wisdom. Emma had not only recovered physically from her accident, but had developed an understanding of healing that combined scientific knowledge with intuitive wisdom. "That's exactly right, sweetheart," Eleanor said, kissing Emma's forehead. "Sometimes the most important thing we can do is make sure that impossible situations have the chance to become possible." As Eleanor turned off the lights and prepared to leave Emma's room, her daughter called out one more question. "Mama, do you think Daddy would be proud of what we did?" Eleanor paused in the doorway, thinking about her father, Dr. James Harris, who had inspired her entry into the pharmaceutical industry, with his belief that medicine should be about healing rather than profit management. "I think," Eleanor said softly, "that your grandfather would be very proud that we learned to trust healing even when it came from unexpected places. He always believed that the most important medical breakthroughs came from doctors who were willing to see patients as people rather than just collections of symptoms." Emma smiled sleepily. "I think he would have liked Owen and Leo." Eleanor nodded, recognizing the truth in Emma's observation. Her father would indeed have appreciated Owen's combination of scientific rigor and compassionate care, would have understood the courage required to pursue healing methods that existed outside established protocols. As Eleanor made her way to her own room, she reflected on how much her life had changed since that desperate morning when Owen Brooks had first appeared in Emma's hospital room. She had built Harris Pharmaceutical into a global empire by refusing to accept that medical problems were unsolvable. Emma's recovery had taught her that sometimes the most important solutions came from people who were willing to risk everything for the possibility of healing. The Harris Brooks Foundation represented more than just Emma's personal triumph. It represented a new model for medical research, one that combined institutional resources with the willingness to explore treatments that challenged conventional wisdom. Most importantly, it represented hope for families who had been told that their situations were hopeless. 6 months earlier, Eleanor had been a desperate mother watching her daughter slip away into permanent disability. Tonight, she was the founder of an organization that was bringing hope to families around the world, the sponsor of research that was changing medical understanding of spinal cord recovery, and the mother of a young woman who had learned that impossible was just another word for not yet achieved. As Eleanor drifted off to sleep, she could hear Emma and Leo talking quietly in the guest room where Leo was spending the night. They were planning their next project for helping other young people understand that recovery was possible, discussing ideas for the Foundation's Youth Advisory Board, sharing the kind of friendship that could only develop between people who had faced impossible challenges and discovered that miracles were sometimes just courage disguised as medical treatment. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new families seeking help, new opportunities to prove that the most important healing happened at the intersection of scientific knowledge and unwavering hope. But tonight, Eleanor Harris fell asleep knowing that she had learned the most valuable lesson of her life. Sometimes the greatest business decision is the one that prioritizes healing over profit, faith over certainty, and love over everything else. The Phoenix Miracle, as the media had named Emma's recovery, had become something much larger than one young person's triumph over paralysis. It had become proof that impossible was not forever, that miracles were available to those brave enough to reach for them, and that sometimes the most important healing began with 2 simple words: "Let me help her." Up next, you've got 2 More standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.